Three, two, one. You ready?
You're listening to the Real Pineapple Podcast Network.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, ladies, and gays. This is the Real Pineapple. This is your humble host, Hunter, here. Hope you're all having a great night, day, weekend, whenever you're checking this out. I am very honored to have a director of a very fascinating story, and I'm really excited to talk to him. He is the director and writer of the film A Little White Lie, which will be out tomorrow. By the time you listen to this, I'll just say March 3rd, just for a date. I've got Michael Maren here. Is it Maren or Maren?
Maren.
Okay,
you got it right the first time.
Boom, there we go. Michael, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing okay.
Happy Friday Eve. Happy Friday Eve. So yeah, I just kind of want to jump in here because I do like to do a little research on my guests, but not too much because I do like to, have the conversation be more free form. But the fact that you were in the Peace Corps, I found that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sure. Go ahead. I'm fine.
I find that fascinating, but I guess my question is, how do you go from being a war correspondent, which I really want to dig into that here in a moment, to being a director? Like, that's such a leap. so kind of talk to me about the journey to get there.
Well, it's you live a life where you don't make any plans. I'm just old enough that I'm in the generation that when like IBM would come to campus trying to recruit, or Goldman Sachs, they'd go into the auditorium and nobody would show up because who wanted to do that? And so I think I always had a what's next kind of take on my life.
Yeah.
And so I joined the Peace Corps. And went to Africa, in large part because I had a romantic attachment to Africa from growing up watching films like Khartoum, and with Laurence Olivier and Charlton Heston and Zulu and all those movies, and The African Queen. I mean, it was white people having great adventures in Africa mostly. But that's a whole nother subject I can go on about forever. But those films are, the kind of the romance of it. And so I didn't want to get a job after college, so I did that. And then I wanted to stay. And I worked a little bit I did some relief work and aid work. And I still wanted to stay because I was getting along. I speak Swahili for what that's worth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I spent a year in Somalia after that. It was in the 1980s before the war started. I predicted the war was going to start because it was pretty obvious. And that's what got me into journalism. I stopped trying to work with the people who were making policy and started trying to expose those policies. In the late 1990s, I wrote a book about the war in Somalia. I wrote the book right around the time I got married. And couldn't take off for 8 or 9 months at a time. And two, I was getting a little bit old to, dodge bullets and sleep in the sand. So I wrote a book, and the book got optioned, and I was able to write the screenplay to that. And that sort of set me off in a whole new direction. I wrote a lot of screenplays. I was able to sell them. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with the business, know that writing screenplays and selling them does not necessarily mean you get movies made.
Exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately,
you get paid. You get paid. You join the guild. You go on strike when they ask you to, which also may be relevant soon.
Yeah, you're not
wrong. And so at one point, I was talking to a producer about finding a director for a script of mine, and he just looked at me and said, why don't you direct it? And I was like, I don't know, I don't know how to direct it. I was in a play when I was in college, but beyond that, I don't know that much about it. He said, no, you can do it. So I that became my first film. Really, it was called A Short History of Decay. I actually wrote it so I could shoot it very inexpensively with a small cast, just to kind of get my feet wet. And bammo, you're a director. I'm a director. You find yourself doing it, and every time I directed, and then I had a whole list of things I wish I'd done differently. So I took them into the next project, and then you move on from there.
Do you recall that first day on set when you're like, oh wow, this is real now? Like I actually have to like do this.
Oh, it's like, yeah, it's like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And I mean, you just threw a segue at me if you want it to be one,
Yeah, of
which is
course.
that that's the character Shriver in this movie, A Little White Lie. It's he's standing there, and um everything sort of becomes disassociative for him. It's you're stand I remember I published my first book in 1997. I remember like almost watching myself. I'm standing in front of a large audience in an auditorium talking and giving a lecture, and I traveled around the world doing this for a while, but I was very much outside myself, thinking like, who is that guy? That's not me. I'm still the 16-year-old kid who had a hard time getting a prom date. So, and I think there's things in our lives we don't get over, and so
Agreed.
you get stuck at certain points, and you spend time in therapy perhaps, but ultimately, yeah, there's a disassociative thing. And that happened again here, and I'm standing and I'm calling action, and I'm looking at Michael Shannon and Kate Hudson standing there, and it's like, oh my God, what am I doing?
So I do
Uh,
want to. So I do have to ask you real quick about the cast because the cast you have is insane, top to bottom. I mean, you've got Michael Shannon, you've got Don Johnson, you've got Kate Hudson, you get Wendy Malick, you get Joy Randolph, you get Jimmy Simpson. Like it's like as people kept showing up in the movie, I was like, oh my god! I was like, yeah, I love them, love them, love them. I found myself saying that over and over again. Since this is really since you're still pretty young as far as in your directorial capabilities, was there any hesitancy? Was there any like oh god, you're you? Like how do you kind of navigate that as far as directing them?
yeah, it's kind of freaky, really, and it all kind of starts with Michael Shannon. People want to work with him, and
Yes.
I'm not delusional enough to say, yeah, yes, Jimmy Simpson really, he'd really dreamed of working with me, or Kate, or Zach Braff, or Divine, who I had to really talk into it. Um, the but it's funny. I mean, I honestly imagined this originally as a quirky movie shot on a low budget. We were going to shoot in Savannah, and then we were going to shoot in New Orleans. And we ended up shooting it in Los Angeles. But yeah, and as the cast kind of grew in terms of their notoriety, I didn't. The script didn't change, but the vibe of it, absolutely became very, very different. And I think audience expectations of the film, and my own expectations of the film changed. I wouldn't say that they became higher expectations, but they were different expectations.
Now, how would you say that the expectations changed from what you originally set out to make versus what it evolved into?
Well, I think right now, I mean, it's being sold it's almost as a rom-com, really, with the way it's set up with Kate and Mike. And there are those elements in there, but I mean, I don't know. You can tell me, you've just watched it, but I don't see it as a rom-com. I
I
don't.
don't either.
I don't. It's there. I think there's some stuff in it that's really funny, but I never see it as an out and out comedy. I see it more as kind of a journey into the dark soul and of one person, and as well as this world where everybody has these ambitions, and we go into this world at this university where everybody wants to be a writer. and they all project all of this stuff on Shriver, who doesn't necessarily understand what's going on with all that projection. But I have the different characters who are at different stages. We have Kate's character is, we come to think of her as a really good writer who just didn't have the connections, never got her work out into the world. And as one of the other younger characters says, the only place you can find her book is in the college bookstore in the local author section.
Which that's deliberately, that's brutally delivered when that line is dropped. I was like, oof.
But, it's true for so many writers. It's true for so many writers we know. And then you've got, but the young woman who says it has bigger ambitions. As she says, when I'm her age, I want to be in Brooklyn with an editor and an agent. I'm not going to be here in fucking
Akron. Yeah.
I don't know. This is a family podcast or not.
Oh no, you can cuss. You're good.
Okay. But so that's the world that's sort of set up, and then you also have the Don Johnson's character, who's a different kind of writer. He's a guy who's probably not that talented, who is we learn is is kind of jealous of Kate's success and puts her down, and so that's sort of the human web that I wanted to look at. And it's something it's a world I know very, very well. I go to writers' conference. My wife is Danny Shapiro, who's a well-known novelist.
Oh yeah.
And so we, in fact, she got an award last night. We were in New York City, but before that, we were at the Savannah Writers Festival in Georgia last weekend, and we do that, and we go to these things, and it's very. I think that the buzz in the movie is very accurate to what it's like at one of these writer festivals.
What I found myself constantly being impressed with is how you, I think, perfectly capture the artistic community, as far as how people definitely have these aspirations of wanting to get there, whatever that definition is, because obviously that's different for whatever, artistic avenue you're going down. But the way that certain characters feel stuck versus how certain characters feel, holier than now as far as their positions. I found that spectrum that you were exploring really fascinating. There's this one line where this one journalist comes up to Shriver and talks about how that's the beauty of internet journalism. Absolutely nothing is more than enough. And that line, I actually had to pause the movie on that line because I went, oh, that's a mic drop moment, in a way that comes from a place that I feel like you're definitely like, I love writing, but at the same time, it felt like there was party that's like, I love writing, but I kind of hate writing. I hate what writing can be. Like, is there some truth in that? Because that felt like a very, not an angry statement, but it felt like a very like, you're looking at the audience and you go, what I'm saying in this moment.
Well, it's funny. The character in it, to give background on the character, which we learn in the movie, is that he used to be on staff at Rolling Stone and he had a job, and then there were cutbacks, and all those magazines are laid off a lot of people. So he ended up writing for, I forget the exact words he used to describe it. It's another expletive. What he's writing for, and he just doesn't care. He's jaded. What he understands is the term I didn't want to use the term because certain terminology I think that people use today can feel dated very quickly. But what he's really saying in the contemporary parlance is that it doesn't matter. It's just all clickbait.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying, but I broke it down. I'm hesitant when I'm writing whatever I'm writing. I try not to use just contemporary terminology, because that stuff comes and goes so fast these days.
Yes, it does. So being a writer and going to this directing sphere, I was reading up a little on the film. You guys got delayed for a while because of COVID, right?
There was a 400-day break. I didn't do the math; someone else did.
Wow.
Between We shut down the film in the middle of March 2020 with 8 shooting days left. When we were
Oh,
able when we were able to resume, that was 400 days later in 2021. We only had 6 days to shoot the eight.
mm.
And then when there were other issues to deal with, Divine was not available. And so I had to kind of write around her part, and she had some big stuff that would have it affected how we had to ended up editing the film. And I mean, not that that's of any interest to an audience necessarily, but in terms of the production side of it, one of our actors was 9 months pregnant. We had to green screen her in later, which
Oh,
was
geez.
which was a whole other trial that months later. And there's little tells in the movie about what was shot in 2020 and what was shot in 2021. If you really want to start looking carefully at stuff, and we tried to cover up some of it, but for the most part, it's there. It's a movie.
But you got it done though. Like give
We
yourself
got
some
it. We
credit.
got it done. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's a movie. There's a point where you don't have to just take things seriously. Like there's the coffee cup that shows up in Game of Thrones kind of thing. It's like, oh well,
Yeah, and I will say for myself, doing this podcast for, oh God, what are we in 2023? So I'm going on 9 years doing this.
wow.
One of the things that's always kind of driven me nuts about art and the discourse is how even when you're not trying to, you're kind of feeding into the machine that I think does undercut art a lot of the time, because I think I really do believe that there is this point where kind of everyone goes, "Oh, I'm a writer," but I think there's a almost a condescending tone that can be taken with that, where it undercuts the art. And I really love the way that with Shriver, there is this point where even though he is, doing this terrible thing and faking it, he becomes an artist through these experiences that he has with these other writers. And the way you portray that, I thought was incredibly fascinating. And I found myself, there's one scene in the movie I don't want to give away, but when audiences see this, they'll know, where it feels like he really steps out of having that internal struggle with himself and starts to believe it. And it was one of those
He
moments where
starts
I went,
to he starts to own it. Yeah.
yeah. And I just, and I won't lie, I went, oh my God, that's so cool. And I felt myself cheering for him. I was like, go Shriver. Sorry, quote unquote Shriver. I was really impressed with the way that scene, the way you made that scene happen. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. With that said, I'm getting the bell that I have time for one more question. So I really enjoyed this film. I'm going to be posting this review with this interview with the review when it goes live here this weekend. In
Oh, great.
closing,
Thank you.
Michael, I just got to ask you: at the end of the day, what do you want audiences to take away from this film? If there's one thing you want audiences to take away from this.
Yeah, I think, well, God, there's a lot, but I think really that, there's some part of all of us that are kind of wounded children. And that you know, you can kind of fake it through life in a way, and we're all kind of faking it because it's all kind of a game. I mean, why are some of these things really important? You create art, you try to do that, you do the best you can, and we all feel the need to judge that art. And I think that one of the things that comes up in the movie is that it's not really clear if Shriver's, if the book Goat Time is the name of the book in there, if that book is any good or anyone actually even read it.
No,
um
yeah.
yeah, and so, there's a human element to all of that. We're all just people, kind of getting by in life, and there's kind of a human comedy in that, and we need to, I think we all need to just lighten up a little bit.
I agree. I think that sometimes we take ourselves too seriously, and just allowing ourselves and each other a little grace would go a long way, especially when it comes in the artistic community. But Michael, thank you so much, sir, for taking this time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, if you wouldn't mind telling people where they can watch this movie, where they can find your work, if they can find you on social media, all that fun stuff.
You can watch the movie. It's in select theaters this week. I think over the next couple weeks, it's showing. But I think most people are going to end up seeing it on demand. I know Apple TV has it up already. If you type in A Little White Lie on Apple, and it'll show up everywhere else on Amazon and other VOD locations. The way to reach me is at MMAREN on Instagram is really my preferred social media because it's the kindest of them all.
That is true. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's my first initial, Michael MMAREN at Maren on Instagram, and I respond to people, and there's a lot of stuff up there, and there's stuff about the movie and photography I do, and a bunch of other stuff.
Perfect. I will definitely be sending you a follow. And like I said, I will get this up here this weekend. Michael, thank you so much again for taking the time. I really appreciate
It's been fun.
Yeah, it really has been. Can't wait to see what you do next. And have a good weekend. And tell your wife congratulations on her award. That's amazing for her.
All right. Thanks, Joshua.
You take care, Michael.
Bye.